What's going on, guys? I'm Jody. This is Inspire Woodcraft. Today we're doing our first ever Q&A. So I'm just going to go through this list of questions that you guys left me a couple weeks ago, and then I will respond the best I can. Our first one says, hello, I'm glad you had this idea. I would like to know, in your opinion, what are your basic tools someone with no expertise in woodworking would be? I live on a canal boat and need to refit it soon, so it will be easier knowing what kind of tools might help. Cheers, and I love your content. Keep up with the good work and be safe in these difficult times. Well, I appreciate the comment and the kind words, and I hope that you're staying safe and sane, because that seems to be my problem, is staying sane while everybody's at home. Now, this is a really tough one for me to answer, and I think really it deserves its own video or two or three all by itself, because there's a lot of different things going on here. So the first thing that comes to mind is you might be blurring the lines between woodworking and carpentry, and that's not a fault of yours. That's what we all do. There's carpenters and there's woodworkers, and there's some carpenters who do a bit of woodworking. There's some woodworkers who do a bit of carpentry. It sounds to me like what you're going to be doing is probably more carpentry related. Now, there's also the difference of tools, because some people say, well, if I'm going to start out with woodworking, I need to use hand tools because power tools, you know, I might cut something or damage myself somehow. And I would actually like to throw it out there that that's not always the case. A lot of times you may not cut yourself with the power tool because you know ahead of time you might cut yourself with the power tool, where with the hand tool you think you're safe, and then you end up hurting yourself with the hand tool. Case in point, saws and chisels are things that have gotten me over time. Now, when I really thought about this question, I thought, what is a good kit that I would put together if I was going to help you with your boat? What would I need? What do I think that I would bring? Essentially, we're all going to do the same things, right? We're going to measure something, we're going to mark it, we're going to cut it, we're going to assemble it. And so that being said, I have a few things here. Some of the things I'm going to say I don't actually have here with me because I don't own one, or I just don't have one. But a few of these things here I think are things that you could benefit from. I'm not necessarily recommending these particular brands. It could be anything, but I think these types of tools will be very beneficial. You're obviously going to want something to measure with. I think a tape measure is the thing we all think of. I would recommend staying away from the super cheap tape measures, but I think a decent quality 16-foot tape measure is going to be one of your best friends. I will also say, and simply for the fact that you said about being new to it, try to use that tape measure for the length of an entire project. Now, if you have a lot of different projects going on, you get through that one project with the one tape measure, and then you decide you don't like that tape measure. I just said tape measure a lot, I apologize, but get through that whole project. If you don't like it, get a different one and then use that one on your next project until you get the one that you like. If you're totally satisfied with that tape, use it forever. My point is don't get 3 or 4 different types of tape measures and use them all on the same project. Tape measures, especially for finer work like with woodworking, can inherently cause mistakes because they're not all created equal. You could pull a measurement with this one, mark it off at 1 foot, pull 12 inches with a different one, and get that mark in a different location. So just be mindful of that. Use one tape for the whole project. When it comes to marking things, a handful of simple number 2 pencils are going to be great. If you're working in a situation where that pencil might roll around and run away from you, maybe look at carpenter's pencils. They're not so great for woodwork, but they are great for carpentry type stuff. And carpenter's pencils are the flat. I might have one laying here. Carpenter's pencils are the flat ones like this. Hopefully that's focusing, because they won't roll. So when you get them on some sort of an incline, obviously they can slide, but they're not gonna roll like where a normal pencil is just gonna roll right off of stuff. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you're using it for a more detailed task, just sharpen it to a really fine point and you should be okay. Now, when it comes to cutting, this is where, seriously, when it comes to cutting, this is where things get a little crazy because there's so many different options on the planet. And one thing that I thought of when I read this comment is I don't know how much electricity you have. I mean, I don't know a lot about boats, but obviously you're not plugged into a house, right? And so I don't know how much electricity or space you have available to you. So I'm not gonna say, oh, you should buy a miter saw or a table saw, because I don't know that that really fits what you're trying to do. I think a decent hand saw and a couple power saws are probably gonna be your best friends, especially if you start going cordless. For me, the hand saw that I grab for most tasks, I'll say, is actually just this inexpensive Irwin. I picked it up at Lowe's, if you're familiar with Lowe's, but you can get them just about anywhere. This is a pull saw. That means that it actually cuts on the pull stroke, removes waste on the push stroke. This has crosscut teeth on one side, it has rip teeth on the other side, and I find myself using this for all kinds of tasks. You're not gonna be able to do a lot of joinery with this as far as more fine stuff like dovetails. If you wanted to do that, I would recommend this saw. I guess I won't go into that, but if you do wanna know, this is a Gaiokucho. This is a back saw, has this ridge right here. If you were to write a question and says, hey, what about if I wanted to do woodworking and a lot of hand-cut joinery, I would totally recommend that saw. It's amazing. But for doing everything else, including large-scale joinery, like timber frame type stuff, I think a decent saw is the way to go. But what's great is these are inexpensive. If you start to break teeth on them, you know, you can get a new one. These stay sharp for a really long time. And because you have two different cutting methods on here, you can use them in a lot of different ways. One thing that I would recommend if you're not really sure with your skills when it comes to the cutting and staying on the line and stuff like that, is maybe looking at getting a miter box. Now I don't have one here to show you, but a miter box is essentially like a square U-shaped little box. It's open and you can drop a 2x4 in that box. In that box will have a fence on both sides. It's really hard to explain. I wish I had one here for you, but it'll have a slot cut in it at 90 degrees. It'll also have a slot cut in it at 45 degrees. Typically it'll have another one at the opposite 45 degrees, and then some of them will have a miter at 45 degrees as well. Those are like the four main cuts that you're gonna find yourself doing with most tasks. The idea is with that slot, you can drop your saw blade into that slot and it will hold your blade at that whatever particular angle, and then you just have to worry about cutting through the material. You don't have to worry about keeping your saw at any particular, you know, angle. And so it's just a guide for you to be able to get those straight cuts. I haven't had one for a long time. I'm sure that there's better ones than others. Usually you can find them at a hardware store for $5 or $6 on the bottom shelf in the tool aisle. I don't know the degree of accuracy. Like I say, I don't have one, but I do know that that can help you at least with getting your hand movement down so that you can start building up that muscle memory. I also recommend the pull saw because it's easier, ergonomically speaking, I guess would be the way to say it. When you're cutting material, the teeth are hooking on that wood and it's pulling, right? When you use a push saw, you would be cutting on the push stroke. It is more natural for your hand to come back in a straight motion while you're pulling something as opposed to pushing something. When you have the pressure from the wood and the saw blade meeting each other, it's just, you end up with a wobbly cut. This is true for most beginners. My opinion is a pull saw is definitely going to be a better route to go when you're trying to teach yourself how to cut to begin with. Now, when you want to get away from the handsaw, you want to add power to it without going into big machinery, I think a jig saw is going to be something that's very beneficial. A jig saw has these tiny teeth on it. The newer ones will have a quick release here so you can pull the blade right out and swap it out. Let's see if I can get that to focus. So these blades come in a lot of different configurations. You can get some that are really thin, so you can do scroll type work and make really tight radiuses. You can also get ones that just rip and tear through everything in sight. They just drop down into the housing there, maybe, and there you go. This blade just comes in and out, in and out, in and out. And so I think that these work really great. You can get them, I think some manufacturers will sell them in a cordless version, which is kind of going to lead me to my next point. I think a cordless circular saw is the way to go. Of course, you could get corded too, save yourself some money. But again, I don't know how much power you have, and some people just don't like carrying that cord around with them. I have a DeWalt. It's a DCS391 if you're interested. I don't know the model number on the jigsaw, I guess it doesn't matter. I'm not recommending any of these manufacturers necessarily, just this is what I have. The good thing about going cordless is that you don't need a ton of electricity, you only need to charge batteries. The other thing is that if you stay with one manufacturer, you can typically, at least with the upper manufacturers, the more higher end, you can typically buy just the batteries or you can buy just the tool. So let's say that I'm a little off topic, I apologize, but let's say I bought this drill and this impact as a set, and that set came with a charger and a couple batteries. I could then buy just the tool, just the saw itself, and save myself a ton of money. Typically with cordless tools, it's the batteries that cost a ton of money, not necessarily the tool. So that's just one thing to think of. This is a 6.5-inch circular saw, and this is gonna work really great for a lot of stuff, especially when you're breaking down like panels. That's gonna come in handy. And what you can do is you can make a guide that'll let you, you measure out however long you need that panel to be, and you can clamp that guide down to your work and run that saw right up against the guide and make a nice clean, straight cut, because those don't cut circles necessarily, but they will give you a very wandering cut if you don't do it right. So having that guide can really help you to get a nice clean straight cut when you're breaking down panel goods. You could also rip material with that saw. There's a lot that you can do with that saw, and like I say, being cordless, it means you can bring it to anywhere you need to go with it. You're not dragging around that cord. Now when we talk about fastening, that's another one of those things. I don't really know exactly what you're going to be fastening. I think glue could be your best friend. I typically use Titebond. I mean, that's what a lot of woodworkers use. This is Titebond 2. They have a Titebond 1, of course, and then they have a Titebond 3, and they're all used for different things. I think the Titebond 3 is better for waterproof situations, which might be the way you want to go since you're on a boat. Also, a polyurethane glue is going to be good for you as well, because those are typically rated for exterior applications. And so that might also be something that you want to look at. As far as the actual fastening of parts together, you could get a 50-pound box of nails and a hammer, or you could get an air compressor and a pneumatic nail gun or something. They also have cordless nail guns now that I think about it, and I think DeWalt actually has one or two of them now. Again, going back to the cordless thing, if you buy all from one manufacturer, doesn't have to be DeWalt, could be anybody, but research that manufacturer and see what other tools they have available to you, so that you can just use the same batteries throughout all those tools. Keep in mind, if you only have a couple batteries, you're gonna burn through those batteries pretty quick. So the more tools you collect, the more batteries you're gonna want, but you don't necessarily have to buy each of those tools with a battery. Another thing that I think is really helpful is having a combination square. I have these Empires that I've recently retired. These are inexpensive. You can get them at most box stores for 10 or 12 bucks. You gotta keep an eye on them a little bit. You may or may not have seen, but I did a video on how to check those for square and how to tune them up so that you can use them for a lot longer than normal. I'll link it up above here or somewhere. If you find that beneficial to you, you can watch that. A combination square is going to let you do a lot of different tasks, from checking things for square to checking different depths, transferring different measurements from one piece to another. So combination square is definitely on that list as well. You may end up needing some clamps. Clamps come in handy for all kinds of stuff, especially if you're working by yourself. A simple clamp, I use these Bessies now, but I still have a lot of these inexpensive Harbor Freight clamps as well. And so this works really well if you need to clamp something on this end, especially if you have that circular saw and you need to clamp that guide down. Grab a handful of these inexpensive F-style clamps. They'll be very beneficial in pretty much everything you do woodworking related. Hopefully I didn't confuse you more than anything, but there's so many different things on the market, and there's so many different ways people look at things. People have different confidence levels. People have different, situations around them. If you're someone who has kids running around a lot, maybe you don't want a lot of power tools or sharp tools laying around. So it's, like I said, it's everybody's got a different situation, but hopefully that gives you some ideas on things that you might need starting out. I've watched all of your Shou Sugi Bond videos. I love the look and have a large picture frame I want to make with that style. My material of preference is spruce framing lumber. However, my first attempt turned out great, but when brushing it doesn't seem to come back to a clean white color like when I started. Have I burnt too deep, too long, or not wire brushed long enough? The texture is all there and I haven't tried staining yet. So this is a question I get a lot. Typically, if you burn this material and then you go to brush it back out and you get those grooves, if you're not getting back to the original color of the wood, a lot of times it has to do with the density of the wood, or it has to do with the moisture content of the wood. The wood that you pick needs to be dry. It needs to be as dry as you could possibly find it, even if you bring it into the shop or wherever you work and let it air dry for a longer period of time to make sure it's absolutely dry. The density also has something to do with it. And even though you're using a softwood, this stick and then this stick, even though they are both pine or both spruce or whatever it is that you want to use, this one could have a different density than this one. And so you know, the more dense material is not going to brush out as easily. I did a video a while back on burning hardwoods and why I don't recommend hardwoods. And I know spruce is a softwood, but again, if you get a piece that's more dense than the other piece that you were using, that could have something to do with it. As far as burning too deep, in my experience, you can't really burn too deep unless you just pulled this out of a campfire. Typically, you're only going to be able to burn so far before it just doesn't really burn anymore at all. So I don't know that that's your problem. If you don't burn long enough, if you have a really shallow burn, that might hurt you though, because you're not burning it long enough to actually burn the grain. Remember, when you brush back out, you're brushing out the soft spring wood and leaving the hard wood grain there, and that's what stays burnt and blackened. The other stuff that you remove is going to be where you find that original wood color back again. Now, one thing could be, and it's another thing that you mentioned, is not brushing long enough. If you're using the wrong type of brush, so I have this hand brush here, this one's brass, I have a stainless one as well. The brass one is softer. As I brush that piece of wood, it's not going to cut down deep enough. At some point, it's going to max out and it can't actually remove the material anymore. And so I'm not going to get that natural wood color back that I wanted. If I use the stainless steel brush, it will, because the bristles are harder and stiffer, it'll actually dig that material out. If you're using these Nylox brushes, I think I talked about this in the last video too. I'm not saying that the 80 grit's always the way to go, because it's definitely not. But the 80 grit is going to be able to dig down deep and scoop that burnt material back out and expose the natural wood color. If you're using the 120 and that's all you're using, you might notice that it takes twice as long to get down that deep, if you can even get down that deep to begin with. And I've experienced with that myself. Obviously, if you're using the 240, it's going to take you, it's almost going to be impossible, right? That's kind of like the difference between like a nylon brush and a wire brush, right? Which one's going to actually dig deep enough to get down in there? So it could honestly just be the type of brush that you're using. Like I say, the 80 grit isn't always the best brush to use, but in most instances, I've found that it typically is. Would love you to do a whole series of videos like the combination square one with different shop tools, just a suggestion. What do you look for in safety glasses? Do you use different ones for different tasks? Well, I appreciate you taking the time to watch those combination square videos and stuff. I do plan on doing that with more tools in the shop. It just sort of depends on how many tools I've upgraded, where I have both of those tools that I can actually give you a comparison on. I see a lot of people who say, you know, oh, this is the best pencil, but they don't have another pencil to compare it to. Or this is the best stain ever, but they don't have another one to show us the comparison, and it kind of drives me nuts. So I do plan on doing that more as time goes on. It just depends on how much stuff I can get into the shop to actually give you a true comparison on one or the other and what the differences are. I think it's been a good series, so I do appreciate you watching it. As far as safety glasses goes, no one's really gonna like what I'm about to say on safety glasses, because I don't have normal safety glasses. I have had thousands of pairs of safety glasses over in my lifetime, just like the rest of you. Safety glasses always drove me nuts, and they're always cheap ones, right? They usually come in like a little plastic bag, and you open it up and you just throw them around and you get a new pair when you're done. I actually have Oakley's. For those that don't know, Oakley's is sort of a higher end, typically sports oriented sunglass manufacturer. I have Oakley radar frames. This is the old style. I have, for my sunglasses, I have the newer Radar EV frames. They have interchangeable lenses, and it's a shield type lens, which I personally like better. It wraps around underneath my eye a little bit better, keeps stuff most of the time from flying up underneath my eye. Of course, unless you wear goggles, nothing's foolproof, right? I originally started doing this because in the beginning, I knew they sold clear lenses for these frames. I used to only use them as sunglasses. I knew they sold clear lenses, but I couldn't imagine bringing such an expensive pair of sunglasses into the shop. But then when I was going to automotive school, we had to have safety glasses in the shop. Before you could even walk into the shop, you had to have the safety glasses on. So because these were interchangeable, I figured I'd give it a shot. So I bought the clear lenses. Before I went into class, I would switch my sunglasses out, put those in a case, and I would put the clear frames in. I've never gone back. These are absolutely amazing. You not only can switch these lenses out, when you put them on, you almost can't see where the bottom of the lens is. So as I'm moving around, it's not nearly as distracting, and everything that I see out of my glasses is just like as if I didn't have any glasses. There's no difference. So sometimes when you use those cheaper safety glasses, you get kind of this weird warpage going on, right? Because they're like a few bucks a piece. I mean, there's nothing to them. They're just basically a piece of like polycarbonate in front of your eyes is basically what it is. With these, they're impact tested just like regular safety glasses. They're scratch resistant. I think the other thing is, and this is kind of funny to say, but because they're more expensive, you tend to take care of them a little bit better. So with the cheap ones, you put them on, if they get scratched or whatever, you know, because you throw them around or you lose them, you throw them out, you get a new pair. You don't always get the same pair the second time. So with those cheaper ones, I noticed a lot of them would either hurt the top of my ears or they would pinch my temples. The nose would be a little goofy. You can get some of them with nose pieces that bend in shape, which is nice. A lot of times they don't stay, so you're constantly fighting them. The earpieces fall off of them. It's kind of annoying. And I got tired of fussing with that all the time. So like I say, I tried these out. I absolutely love it. And I do recommend them. I just know that it's one of those weird things that people might think is ridiculous for out in the shop. I just know from personal experience, it's not ridiculous. It's just like any other tool in the shop. And I will say that since I've had these, I wear these more than when I had the cheaper ones. In my own shop. Of course, if you're in someone else's shop, you have to play by their rules. But in my own shop, I find that I actually wear my safety glasses, having these clear lenses in the better frames, than when I used to just have cheap safety glasses all the time, because I'm not as annoyed with them. They don't hurt my face, they're comfortable. I wear them all day long for hours and hours and hours. I love them. And I don't change them for different tasks, going to the second part of your question. In fact, it's kind of silly, but I was in our house, I was cleaning one of the bathroom showers, and I had some spray bleach type stuff. I didn't want it spraying back into my eyes. So I actually went and I grabbed these for that very same reason. So no, I have the one pair, I use them for everything. How did you build your business? I mean the client side of your business, not the YouTube creator side. This is a really good question, and actually I don't have a good answer, unfortunately. I give all the credit to the building of that as far as getting clients and stuff. I give all that credit to my wife. She's sort of the social media buff. I was doing really good on Instagram, but after a while, what I would notice is if I posted build pictures, you know, people would interact with me and stuff. But then when it came time to like maybe sell something, crickets. I didn't hear from anybody. And that was because my whole audience was other like-minded people who could do a lot of the things that I was doing. They're not gonna buy anything from me. And so I struggled with it for a long time. My wife, on the other hand, through Facebook and all her friends and stuff like that, would have friends and family members starting to buy from us. And eventually that creeped out into the community, so to speak. And so I would start doing custom jobs there. But I actually can't give you any advice on that side, because I've almost completely stopped doing custom stuff because I'm honestly no good at the pricing part. I swear I always lose my butt on it. I never can figure out how to actually, I feel like, you know, I've priced it right, you know, because when you make a quote, you don't want to overprice something because you're afraid of not getting the job. So you maybe, you know, you don't want to undersell it or underbid it because then you don't want to lose your pants on it. I always think like I'm right in the sweet spot. We get the job and I'm totally psyched. And about halfway through the job, I realize I didn't charge nearly enough for this. So being that, I've switched over to YouTube. Since I've switched to that and I have more control over that stuff, and I know you weren't interested in the YouTube part, but I've honestly changed almost my entire business model over to the sort of tutorials and educational part because it's just a better situation for me. In a previous video sometime back, you mentioned having a good trick for white stained Shou Sugi bond. I have been struggling with getting a look I like. What is your trick/technique? I actually made a video just for you on this very subject. Last video I put out was going over white Shou Sugi bond, and this is one of the pieces here. If you like that look, I'm going to go ahead and redirect you to this video here. This is going over white Shou Sugi bond if you haven't already seen it, of course. White is a very tricky color, so anybody else who is watching this, if you're interested, I highly recommend checking out that video, because in that video I go over all the different techniques and everything on getting white. Is your shop in a separate location from your house? Nope. Unfortunately, it is not. And the reason I say unfortunately is because there are some days where I wish that I could just drive to a different location and I didn't have to worry about people coming and going. I didn't have to worry about the neighborhood noises and stuff like that. But no, my shop is actually in my garage, and this plastic wall that you see behind me, that actually separates the shop side of the garage from the garage side of the garage, if that makes sense. So over there is where we store, you know, things, bicycle stuff like that. And then on this side is where I have the shop stuff. And that plastic wall is similar to something you'd see in like a construction site or something, where they have one particular part kind of walled off for some reason, like in a commercial building or something where they have to do maintenance. And so that's what I have. I will actually link a video to my one and only shop tour. You don't have to watch the whole thing if you're not interested, but in the beginning of that, I kind of go over what that wall system is and how we set it up. If you're interested, I will link that up there, and I think take a look at that. You might be able to get a better idea for what we did. I like the way Shou Sugi bond looks with the grooves, but on a table or something it would be inconvenient. Is there a way to get that look but still be flat? Yes, there is, and I think you guys talked a little bit about it in the comments underneath that, but I'm gonna say epoxy all the way. The thing with epoxy is, though, typically on a smooth surface, you can do like a thin pour and have it run over the edges. This is gonna be a little bit more difficult because obviously you have ridges, right, and valleys. So I would recommend doing it in layers. So if you don't wanna build a form or something, do it in layers. Put a seal coat down, build up on those layers per manufacturer's instructions until you get it up to a nice level surface, and let it kind of pour out the sides. But it's probably still gonna pour out the sides some. You might need to still build a form. If you build a form, what I did last time is I used melamine, and then I waxed the inside of the melamine with just regular paste wax, and it came apart almost perfectly. So just a little tip there. One thing I can't stress enough, though, is to use a seal coat. If you use a seal coat on there, you're not gonna end up with so many bubbles coming up through that. If you don't, you're gonna end up babysitting it with a heat gun or a torch or something for a long time, trying to get the bubbles to go away. But yes, you can definitely build up those layers. If you build a form, you could probably do the whole thing in one pour, right? Again, depending on the manufacturer. But if you're going to let it just pour off the edges, probably do the seal coat and then just do small layers until you finally build up enough. But I think epoxy is definitely the way to go for that. Our next one comes from Austin Steele. Austin's been with us for a long time, and I really appreciate, by the way, all your support. I hope you and your family are healthy and doing great. I was wondering if you would do a video on making a wood toilet paper roll holding stand or something of that nature. Maybe it could get some much needed laughs as well. I'm not doing that, although it is kind of funny. So that was our first Q&A. I know that I rambled a lot. Some of you guys stuck around and listened to that, and you guys are the ones I'm most appreciative of, because you guys care to stick around and listen to detail, which I appreciate. Some of these things have so many different moving parts that it's, you know, there's a lot of stuff to get out there. Anyways, let me know what you think of the Q&A. I've never done this before. I never knew how much, you know, Q&As were a part of like woodworking channels and stuff, but I don't know. If we want to do another one, let me know and we'll set up another one. Anyways, that's it for me. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. As always, we'll see you in the next one.